So I can finally say it, UFC Fight Night Dern versus Ribas 2 is taking place this weekend. We did just of course have a 3-week break from the UFC over the Christmas holiday and New Year period, and now we are getting ready to start the UFC 2025. I'll be honest with you guys, I was actually quite enjoying the break. I personally did take a bit of a break from YouTube, but this last few days, it has been quite difficult. The 2-week break was great because I was, to be honest, still just a little bit burnt out from having to commit so much time to the Contender Series, UFC, and the PFL a couple of months ago. And now that we are here, I can't wait for it to come back again. So I feel pretty good now coming into 2025. Hopefully I can keep up what I did in 2024. I did show some results and compared myself to others at my UFC 311 prediction video, which I do already have out as well. But 2025 in general, I would actually quite like it to be a year of collaboration. I wouldn't mind building relationships with other channels that I haven't before. There are channels in the past that I've collaborated with frequently that I don't really do that anymore with, so that could be quite cool to see. I think 2025 should be a pretty good year, and it hopefully could be a pretty good year for We Want Picks as well. If you do sign up to the We Want Picks premium membership, that is $10 per month. If you sign up using my code ARTIM, you will get a 10% discount on your first membership. And with that being said, I don't think I really have too much to add to talk about this card, so let's get into it. I should say this actually, 14 fights on the first card of the year, 14 fights on the first pay-per-view of the year. If you know me and you've watched my channel before, you do know that I do quite enjoy these longer cards. It just does mean that my prediction videos do end up being pretty long for them. Now, the first fight on the Tapology bout order is a short notice replacement fight that was only announced a few hours ago at the time of me recording this video. Joe Solecki is now stepping in for Yanal Ishmouz as he is taking on Nurullo Aliev, who is going to be making his return fight since not fighting at all in 2024. And this is a interesting matchup, I would say, considering the fact that Joe Solecki, just last year I was talking about how Joe Solecki was on a really sneaky run in the UFC, and he was 5-1 at one point, and just nobody was talking about him. And you don't typically go 5-1 in a very tough UFC division such as lightweight without people talking about you. But then he did end up with a couple of big steps up in competition against Close and Dawson, and he did lose both of those fights. And I think that he is going to lose this one in a similar manner, to the way that he did lose to Grant Dawson. And in that fight, Grant Dawson got 3 takedowns, one in every single round, and controlled him for about 14 minutes of the entire fight. In the first round, Joe Solecki was only credited with 2 significant strikes, but he did cut open Grant Dawson with an elbow, and he did have a guillotine attempt. But aside from that, it really was just Grant Dawson controlling him on top. And if you do know what Nurullo Aliev's fighting style is, you know it is very similar to that Grant Dawson style, where he does fight with a wrestling heavy, top control heavy style. He wants to get the takedowns and he wants to get off ground and pound. His striking, Aliev, I would say it is somewhat basic, but he does have a pretty decent jab, and I would say that it probably has improved in the nearly 2 years away that he has taken from the Rafael Alves fight. I think this is just a tough matchup for Solecki. You know, he just lost to Grant Dawson in a fight which, I'll be honest, wasn't really close, and now he's taking on a very similar stylistic matchup. So for Solecki, I just don't think that this is a good matchup for him, even though I think that Solecki is a talented fighter. We don't have odds for this one. Aliev was minus 450 against Yanal Ishmouz, and those odds were insane. I probably could expect insane odds again, but the only way I really see Joe Solecki winning this fight is by catching Nurullo Aliev in a submission, and no one's really been able to do that to Aliev so far in his career, so I do think Aliev is going to win a decision or maybe a ground and pound finish in this fight. Now we move up to another fight which the odds are just crazy. This is kind of what happens when the UFC goes on a break, even just a 1-week break. A lot of people look at the next card and they try to get their bets in early, and it just makes the odds really wide. Fatima Kline shouldn't be a minus 800 favorite in this fight, even though I do think that she is a very good prospect, especially at this weight class of 115 pounds. I did actually pick her to beat Jasmine de Souda Vicious. Yes, that in hindsight was a really bad pick, but that was based on just the skill set that I do believe Fatima Kline does have. Kline is a really talented grappler. She has a massive professional grappling background going back to 2020 when she would have only been 20 years old. And then she takes on Victoria Dudakova, who is also a grappler. Victoria Dudakova is a wrestler, and she does actually hold a win over a fighter that I would say is similar in the skill set to Kline when she did go out there and she did win on the Contender Series against Maria Silva. Maria Silva is a talented grappler, has found success in other promotions outside of the UFC now. But Dudakova, I think in this one here, Fatima Kline is just going to be better at the pure grappling. And although Kline did slow down a bit in her very short notice fight against Jacobbe on about 5 days notice up a weight class, I think that she's got the better cardio to defeat Dudakova as well. We saw Dudakova gas out against Sam Hughes. I think Fatima Kline can just kind of do the same thing that Sam Hughes did, except just be a bit more dominant in the grappling, which is why I'm picking Kline here. I mean, a lot of people are picking Dudakova. Are these odds? Is she actually minus 800? Yes, Fatima Kline's minus 1,000 on one of the sports books. Okay, these are crazy odds. I'm picking Kline. Don't bet on her. It's just not worth it, honestly. Magomed Gadzhiyasulov now fights against Bruno Lopes. Magomed Gadzhiyasulov is one of those guys that I talked about in my video talking about every single fighter that I'm looking forward to seeing fight in 2025. And it is because I do genuinely believe in his skill set. Now, I don't see that many other people out there really agreeing with me or other people that are as high on Gadzhiyasulov as I personally am. But I have been quite impressed by what I've seen so far. Now, his performances haven't been super entertaining. He hasn't been getting a lot of finishes. But I do believe that he does have a skill set everywhere at 205 pounds. I think he's got pretty technical striking for this weight class. I think he's got really good wrestling and top control for this weight class. And now he's taking on Bruno Lopes, who at one point, prior to his first Contender Series fight where he got knocked out by Brenton Ribeiro and made me look like a right idiot, which I'll never, ever forgive him for, was looking unstoppable. He was the LFA champion. He was getting a lot of really good wins. I think he was 12-0 with 12 finishes or something crazy like that. 12-0 with 10 finishes. He was looking good. And then he got KO'd by Brenton Ribeiro by just kind of being slow with no defense. And then he did the same thing against Mikhail Saziniani. If you watch his fight against Saziniani, Bruno Lopes is slower than him, is getting hit by him. It just really was a bad performance, and it's really made me believe that Lopes isn't as good as what I thought he was. Bruno Lopes, he is just really slow. As I said, I don't think that he's going to be as fast on the feet as Gadzhiyasulov. And although Lopes, I would say, does have a lot more finishing ability than Magomed Gadzhiyasulov, I would be surprised if he catches Magomed, because I think Magomed is going to shoot for takedowns in this fight. Lopes can grapple at a pretty decent level for 205 pounds, but in all honesty, I do think that this is a good matchup for Gadzhiyasulov to go out there, be the fastest striker, get the takedowns when he needs to, and ultimately win a decision. I really would like to see a finish out of Gadzhiyasulov, but I just don't know if it's going to come against an opponent that is still as good as what Bruno Lopes is. So I'm picking Gadzhiyasulov by decision. Ernesta Kareckaite is now fighting against Nicolle Caliari. And this is a fight which does confuse me a little bit. Now, I will say in my early prediction video that I did make a couple of weeks ago before I went on my break that Kareckaite got completely out-grappled by Dione Barbosa. I rewatched that fight. I was wrong. That was a bad read by me, but I will stand on a couple of things that I did say. Barbosa absolutely out-grappled Kareckaite in the first round. In that fight, she spent a couple of minutes or so striking with Kareckaite, and then she got a couple of takedown attempts, eventually got one, and as soon as she got the takedown, Kareckaite gave up the back. Barbosa had the back for most of the rounds, ended up turning it into an armbar, but it was just too little, too late. And in the second round, Barbosa does shoot for a lot of takedowns and doesn't really get many of them. So Kareckaite's takedown defense was much better in the second and the third round, but ultimately I did think that it was still too little, too late, and Barbosa won the decision based on some of that grappling that we did see. But Ernesta Kareckaite is only a striker. She does have a kickboxing background. Prior to the Contender Series fight, I was watching her fights and I was not really that impressed. And then she goes out there and put on one of the best Contender Series fights ever against Caliari, which was a fantastic performance. But for the most part, Ernesta Kareckaite, she likes to strike from range, and she only throws one strike at a time. She very rarely throws combinations. She now fights Nicolle Caliari, who is a fighter whose opinion of, for me, has completely flipped. I did pick against her on the Contender Series when she fought Corinne Laframboise, but it mostly was because there just was genuinely no tape out there on her prior to, I believe, the Invicta FC fight. I couldn't find any of her Face to Danger fights or Fight Music show fights, but these are two promotions that don't really have a great reputation anyway. But Nicolle Caliari, she actually does have a Muay Thai background, and she has developed grappling very well over time. She just submitted Corinne Laframboise, who is a pure grappler, and in this matchup, she's taking on a fighter that I think is like much lesser of a grappler than Laframboise is, and on the feet, she's going to be a much better striker and is going to present more threats on the feet than what Diana Barbosa was able to do, who really is only a grappler. So I think in this matchup, I like Caliari's options here. Now, I don't think that she can outstrike Kareckaite. She is going to need to look for takedowns, but I think if she does look for takedowns, I think that she can out-grapple Ernesta Kareckaite as a pretty significant underdog in this fight. I think that she is sitting around like plus 230 on Bet Online right now, plus 200 on Betway. Pretty big underdog is Caliari, but I do just like the skill set that she does have, and it looks like a lot of the Tapology voters do seem to agree. Another short notice fight that was just announced a couple of hours ago. Jacobe Smith is now stepping in to fight against Preston Parsons. This was originally meant to be Andreas Gustafsson versus Preston Parsons, and I will be honest, I actually am quite upset about this because I was really looking forward to seeing Andreas Gustafsson's UFC debut, because I think that that guy has the potential to be one of the most fun to watch fighters in the promotion. But hopefully that means we can get Billy Goff versus Andreas Gustafsson, which would be nearly the guaranteed fight of the year if it was to happen. To talk about this fight though, Jacobe Smith had one of, if not the best Contender Series performances in 2024. He completely dominated an opponent that did have a pretty significant size advantage over him. He took down Christian Savoy, dominated him on the ground for just the entirety of the fight, as long as the fight lasted. It wasn't remotely close, and the crazy thing about Jacobe Smith is, despite having an incredible amount of wrestling, he does have insane one-punch KO power. If you've got UFC Fight Pass, maybe you can see it on ESPN+. I recommend just watching these fights because he just one-punch slump KOs his opponents. Now, Jacobe Smith, I would say that his striking is definitely still in development. I don't think it's something that he can lean on in most matchups, just in a pure striking matchup. But you cannot deny the power that he does have. And another thing about Smith is, apparently he can make 155 pounds. He isn't a big welterweight at all, but compared to the fighter that I was watching earlier on in his career, to the fighter that fought on Christian Savoy, he has gained a lot of weight. So he has been putting on a lot of muscle and a lot of mass to, I guess, make 170 and still be quite big for the weight class. But I think now, after this fight, there is a chance he's going to move to 155. So Jacobe Smith, very talented wrestler with a lot of power in his hands in the ground and pound and also on the feet. Preston Parsons, his nickname does kind of explain his style. He does want to move forward. He does want to shoot for takedowns. He does want to grind up against the cage. His pure grappling is pretty decent. But in this matchup, I think that it is actually a more tough matchup for him, because Andreas Gustafsson, as much as I love him, as much as I think he's fun, he is a very flawed fighter, and from what I've seen out of Jacobe Smith, he is still a prospect, but this guy does have all of the talent and all of the potential in the world to maybe make something happen. So if he can get past Preston Parsons, I think he's a guy to really keep your eye out on and really watch out for in the future. I am going to pick Smith in this matchup. I am going to pick Smith to win by knockout. I do think that the knockout is probably going to come actually in the form of ground and pound, which I know is a pretty rare way of finishing in the UFC these days, but he does just genuinely have that much power on the ground, and I think he is going to hurt Parsons on the feet, take him down, and then eventually find a finish in top control. Jacobe Smith, a legitimate talent that I think could go far in the promotion. given like good matchups and good management, I think. Thiago Moises now fights against Trey Ogden. I have been picking Thiago Moises so far, and I'm still going to stick with that. But I am going to say this, of course. I said it a couple of weeks ago. I'll say it now. Trey Ogden does make me look bad because he is just constantly showing up to prove me wrong. And I love it, to be honest with you, Trey Ogden. He's a guy that came into the UFC, I believe, on short notice against Jordan Levitt. Gave Jordan Levitt a pretty tough fight. And then, out of nowhere, beat Daniel Zellhuber in a striking matchup, and since then has actually started to look quite good and has been able to utilize his very awkward striking style with the BJJ that he does possess. I'm pretty confident he's a gym owner and a coach as well, so he does have other fighters as well that he has been looking after. Thiago Moises is a fighter which I maybe overrate based on the Islam Makhachev performance. But if you do really watch Thiago Moises, he does genuinely have a very good talent in the grappling. And I do think, despite Trey Ogden's accolades in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Thiago Moises, I do believe that he can go up there against Ogden and get the takedowns, win the scrambles, and eventually find either a submission finish, which would be very hard to do against Ogden, who I don't think has still been finished so far in his career. Am I correct in saying that? He's been subbed 3 times. Ignore what I just said. But I think Thiago Moises, I think that he can go out there and grapple with Ogden. I think he can go out there and get the control. So I like Moises here. I like him to wrestle against Ogden. I think if anyone's going to be shooting the takedowns, I do think it would be Moises as well in this fight. And the odds are getting a little bit wider because Moises is minus 200 right now. So I know a lot of people out there will be on Trey Ogden, and I think right now you're going to get some wide odds. He's about plus 165 on Bet Online at the time of me recording this. I like Moises. I think that Ogden is going to be a popular underdog, though, throughout the week. Marco Tulio now fights against Ihor Potieria at 185 pounds. I do think that this is a good matchup for Marco Tulio. I think he probably does win it by knockout. But I will say this. There is a chance for Ihor Potieria to pull off a big upset here because I think that Marco Tulio does leave himself a little bit too exposed when he strikes. If you watch his Contender Series fight against Matteo Close, he spent the whole fight just looking for a highlight reel knockout, and he does this by overthrowing everything. He does it by throwing, well, he threw a spinning back kick to get the finish. He was throwing spinning back fists. He was throwing spinning kicks throughout the entire fight. This guy was doing everything he could to get a highlight reel finish, and I think maybe it just was to get the contract. But if he does that against Ihor Potieria, I do think he would knock him out. But the thing is, he was overthrowing so much and leaving himself open for so many counters that a better striker than Matteo Close probably could have gone out there and exposed that. Marco Tulio is a shooter box guy. He fights with a shooter box style, very aggressive Muay Thai with grappling, and he does have pretty solid grappling at 185 pounds. He did go out there and fight against Yusri Belgari. A lot of people thought that he should have actually got a UFC contract based on the win over Yusri Belgari, but apparently Belgari was sick and the UFC knew that, so they weren't that impressed by the performance considering. But in this one here, I think Tulio can knock out Potieria on the feet. Ihor has been completely changing his style recently. The guy that fought in the Contender Series a couple of years ago was a wild man with no regard for striking defense. Now Potieria has been fighting with a lot more technique and a lot more reservation, but I think that has actually been a detriment to his game. Potieria thrived on being ridiculously aggressive and catching his opponents off guard. He can't do that with the current style that he's got. And he's shooting takedowns as well, which is odd because Tulio is a really good grappler. So I think that Tulio is going to go out there. I think he does get the knockout, but just be a little bit careful because Potieria does have an opportunity to catch him if he leaves himself too open. Jose Johnson fights against Felipe Bunez. Jose Johnson still at 125 pounds doesn't make sense to me. He's 6 foot tall at 125 pounds. He's massive for the weight class. He looked comically large against Asu Almabayev. But I don't like it. This is a guy, Jose Johnson, who despite not having the best record, genuinely did have a regional career at 135 pounds that I actually had a lot of respect for. All of the guys that Jose Johnson lost to ended up being pretty good. Ronnie Lawrence on the Contender Series in 2020, somewhat successful UFC career. Dre Miley, if you guys don't know, is the one-eyed fighter from the US, who I quite often use in reference to saying that Sharaputdin Magomedov should be able to fight in the US. Anyways, Mana Martinez went on to fight in the UFC. Not so much success, but still did. Mo Miller at one point was a ridiculously hyped up prospect, and so was Jack Cartwright, who now fights for Octagon. Good wins. He loses a couple of fights, well, one fight in the UFC, and then he beats Chan and Haliga, and now he decides that he wants to fight at 125 pounds. I don't understand. Jose Johnson's a Muay Thai fighter. He does have good defensive grappling, but not great defensive grappling. I think in this fight he is going to be the better striker. Felipe Bunez has been signed to the UFC for a while now, but I believe one of his fights was cancelled because he did fail a drug test and had to take a very short suspension. So I guess maybe it was just a tainted supplement. He just said publicly that he was going to be providing all of the necessary information, so it must have just genuinely been something along those lines. But Felipe Bunez, a decent fighter, but I think that in a striking matchup, which this very likely is going to be, if anyone's shooting for takedowns, it would be Bunez. I think Johnson's the better striker. I think that he can utilize that size advantage that he does have, but still, I think his ceiling's at 135. I actually think that Jose Johnson is a pretty solid fighter, and he could go far at 135. 125 is just so hard to see him being able to make the weight consistently and regularly at that size. Now, Pillow Hands Punahali fights against Uroš Medic. Now, Betsam is picking Punahali Soriano with a bit of confidence, so this is kind of me going against Betsam, who I think is someone that me and him are going to be doing a lot of work together in the big 2025. But I just don't think Pillow Hands Punahali is going to go out there and knock out Uroš Medic. Now, he couldn't knock out Miguel Baeza, who has already had his chin snatched so many times. And in that fight, Punahali Soriano dominated Miguel Baeza and just couldn't find a finish against him. He dominated him in the wrestling. He dominated him on the feet. Miguel Baeza was ready to tap to strikes at multiple points in that fight, I thought, and he just still could not find the finish, which is kind of crazy. But in this fight, I think it actually is going to be Soriano that shoots for takedowns, because Punahali Soriano does actually have a pretty high-level wrestling background at the college level, and we have been seeing that implemented into his game somewhat recently, since the pure power punching just hasn't really been able to work for him. But against Uroš Medic is a former lightweight that come up to 170, and he's looked pretty good since then. I think that Uroš Medic is a guy that, despite having some flaws in his game, has been making improvements recently. And I think the striking, I think that he is the more technical striker in this fight, and I think he could land on Punahali Soriano. So I think that we are going to see Uroš Medic go out there and beat Punahali Soriano on the feet, and I think he is going to find the knockout in this matchup. Austin Bashi now makes his very highly anticipated UFC debut against Christian Rodriguez. I do think Bashi wins. Bashi is actually a fighter that I genuinely forgot to put on my list of prospects to watch out for in 2025. So I do apologize for that. But Bashi's 13-0 against really good competition at 135 pounds. I have said it before, and I will continue to say it. I don't understand why he's fighting at 145 pounds in the UFC. I know Alex Bahunian, the journalist, told me that there's no chance he's making 135 again, but I just don't see it. This guy is not big for 145 whatsoever, and look at the success that he had at 135. He beat Pipe Vargas, who is a prospect that all of his losses come to good opponents. Very good records that he beat on the regional scene as well. Askar is a bit of a staple of the regional scene, and he's been getting a couple of good wins and also losing to really good guys recently too. One on the Contender Series, but it was somewhat of a disappointing performance considering the opponent change and Dorian Ramos just not being as good as Tommy McMillan was. But I think that Bashi is a guy that you need to keep your eye out for. This guy really does have future champion written on him. 23 years old, 13-0. The wrestling's there, the grappling's there. The striking, I think, is actually a little bit underrated. He actually does have pretty good instincts on the feet. But I do just worry about the size difference that he's going to have when he does take on opponents that aren't former bantamweights, like Christian Rodriguez. Christian Rodriguez, former bantamweight, he just missed weight way too many times. The UFC said, no more of that, you're fighting at 145, and he's looked okay. He did lose recently to Julian Erosa, which was very unexpected. I didn't see that come in at all. He should have lost to Isaac Bulgarian, let's be realistic here, but he beat Cameron Simon and he beat Raul Rosas Jr., and this is the fight that I really look at when I come to a comparison to this matchup against Bashi, because Austin Bashi and Rosas Jr. do have somewhat similar fighting styles where they are going to be shooting for takedowns pretty regularly. And in that fight, Rosas Jr. was shooting takedowns against Christian Rodriguez, and he was getting them in the first round. But then he completely gassed out. C-Rod was able to start defending the takedowns and started to box him up on the feet. In this one, though, I think Bashi's cardio and just honestly wrestling ability is actually better than Rosas Jr.'s was 2 years ago. So I think that Bashi can go out there and get the takedowns against C-Rod and just kind of keep it going for 3 rounds. Somewhat similar to what Isaac Bulgarian did and somehow not get the decision win. So I think that Bashi does beat C-Rod. I think that he does get it done by decision. I would love to see Bashi at 135, but if he truly can't make the weight class, then it is what it is. But I think that Bashi can go out there and get it done and beat Christian Rodriguez by decision. Now, Chris Curtis fights against Roman Kopylov. A lot going on with Chris Curtis these days. Claimed that there were Russian spies in the camp at Extreme Couture. Apparently 4 guys from Russia joined the camp. They wanted to train there. And then they started hanging out with Roman Kopylov when Roman Kopylov showed up to the gym. Turns out that just weren't spies whatsoever. And Chris Curtis, as always, was overreacting like he does every time he's on Twitter. I think he's actually deleted Twitter now, which is definitely for the best. But a lot of people were saying it's hilarious that someone would send in spies to spy on Chris Curtis's training because he fights the same every single fight. Curtis boxes. He does have wrestling, but he doesn't really use it. All he does is box. And in this fight, I think that Roman Kopylov just simply has more weapons on the feet. Kopylov's a pretty talented kickboxer who was losing very early on into his UFC career because he didn't have very good takedown defense. But I think that takedown defense has been improving. He did lose to Anthony Hernandez, but Anthony Hernandez is the worst possible stylistic matchup for Kopylov. And really anyone that's a striker at 185 pounds. And in this fight here against Chris Curtis, I think Chris Curtis could get a takedown or 2, but I think ultimately Kopylov's takedown defense has improved now to the point where if it is a pure striking matchup, I do trust Kopylov's skill set, his kickboxing ability, to be the better striker here in this fight. Chris Curtis is tough. He's a tough guy to finish. I honestly don't see Kopylov knocking him out, but I think a lot of people might. So I am picking Kopylov to win a decision just based on having more tools at the ready to defeat Chris Curtis when it does come to a striking fight. Curtis is also getting older. He's nearly 38 years old at this point. Kopylov is going to have a pretty significant height advantage over him too. I think Kopylov is going to go out there and get it done by decision. This is a fun fight between Abdul Razak Al Hassan and Cesar Almeida at 185 pounds. And I think that Abdul Razak Al Hassan has a very serious chance to win this fight if he goes out there and uses that judo. But the thing is, he never does. And I don't think he really ever has. Now, I know that he has in some fights, but you just cannot trust him to ever use it. Abdul Razak Al Hassan does have a pretty big time judo background. I don't think it's a ridiculously impressive, but it is good enough to the point where if you guys don't know this about Abdul Razak Al Hassan, he stays behind at the gym, at the training to coach judo or to help other fighters there with their judo. So he does have very good judo there. His nickname's Judo Thunder, but most of his wins come by KO in the first round, and for the most part he wants to go out there and throw hands on the feet. Now against Cesar Almeida, I don't think that he should throw hands on the feet, because Cesar Almeida, a former Glory kickboxer, a guy that does hold a win over Alex Pereira in kickboxing, and he has looked pretty good so far in his career. You know, he did come in very inexperienced in MMA, beat Lucas Fernando in a fight which had a very surprising amount of grappling in it, and then he beats a wrestler in Dylan Budka where he had to defend so many takedowns. Roman Kopylov and him went to a pretty competitive fight, and then since then he did beat Ihor Potieria. Against Abdul Razak Al Hassan, it kind of just is, if you survive the first round against Abdulrazak Alhassan, you're probably going to do pretty well. And another thing about Abdulrazak Alhassan is he just does not defend leg kicks. I know that Claudio Ribeiro was finding a lot of success in the first round by just kicking his leg, and Alhassan was doing nothing about it. And I think that Almeida could just do the same thing. Just work the legs, work the body in the first round, defend the takedowns if they do come, because there is a chance that they will. But knowing Abdulrazak Alhassan, that's 50-50. You may as well flip a coin. And I think that in this one, the better striker is Cesar Almeida. In a pure striking matchup, the guy that I can trust to go 15 minutes is Cesar Almeida. Abdulrazak Alhassan's only ever won one fight out of the first round. All of his other wins are in the first. I like Almeida to get it done. I like Almeida to either get a late finish, like second round or third round KO, or a decision win in this fight against Alhassan. In this fight, the odds have flipped. I was picking Santiago Ponzinibbio as an underdog a couple of weeks ago, and now he is the favourite. I believe he's sitting at -120 on BetOnline. Still very near even odds. Still the underdog on Betway at the time of me recording this, but we're pretty much looking at an even odds fight now at this point. And I am still siding with Santiago Ponzinibbio. And the reason is, I think that he's the better striker, and I know that he's the more technical striker in this fight. Carlston Harris's striking, I don't think it's very good. It just is very untechnical, if that even makes sense. It's somewhat sloppy, but we all know that Carlston Harris's skill set is not in the striking. Sorry, it's in the grappling. So it comes down to whether or not do you think that Carlston Harris can go out there and get the takedowns against Santiago Ponzinibbio. And I honestly just don't think that he can. I think that Santiago Ponzinibbio is going to keep this fight on the feet. I think that he is going to go out there and just be the better striker against Carlston Harris. And if you do look at Santiago Ponzinibbio's last few fights, all of his losses, or not all of them, most of them have been pretty close. Muslim Solecki, an older fighter, but a split decision against a very good Kung Fu background fighter in Solecki is not a bad loss to really have. To be fair, he was losing to Morono until he knocked him out, but a split decision loss to Mikhail Pereira and Jeff Neal only a couple of years ago, after coming back from injury, aren't really bad performances to have. And I think in the striking, Ponzinibbio is the better striker, and I think that if the fight does stay on the feet, Ponzinibbio is going to have all of the advantages, which is why I'm going to pick Ponzinibbio to win this matchup by decision. I feel like if you're picking Harris because you think he's going to get the takedowns, and that is fine, that makes sense. This is an even odds fight for a reason. It is very close, but I do think that Ponzinibbio is going to go out there and win the fight in the striking. And now in the main event, Mackenzie Dern is going to be taking on Amanda Ribas. This is a rematch from a few years ago now at this point, I believe, in which Amanda Ribas did defeat Mackenzie Dern in 2019. Okay, it was longer ago than I thought. I thought it was in 2021. But anyways, Ribas did win that fight against Dern, and it was because she is the more well-rounded fighter. And I think 5 years later, we can make the same assumption. I do think that Amanda Ribas is the more well-rounded fighter in this one here. Ribas' striking is very effective, but it does have some pretty major flaws in the fact that her striking defense isn't that great. She just kind of does bomb forward, throwing big shots, having decent Muay Thai, but the striking defense, the hands are always pretty low. The head movement is, for some moments, pretty non-existent, but it is still very effective striking. And against Mackenzie Dern, a fighter who I think just has much worse striking than Amanda Ribas, aside from her one lone performance against Angela Hill, where she just showcased some really good striking and made me believe that she was a really good striker, and improved drastically. Dern hasn't looked that good on the feet. As I have said before, she is also on a CTE speedrun. Dern is just going out there trying to get knocked out. She's taking matchups which is nearly going to guarantee in a knockout loss. She got KO'd by Jessica Andrade. It's a miracle she never got KO'd by Amanda Lemos. She's now fighting against Amanda Ribas. I think Amanda Ribas knocks her out. To be honest, this is 5 rounds at this point, and if Dern can't get the takedowns, which he has really struggled to do throughout her entire career, her career percentage takedown offense is not very high. I think that Ribas can go out there and get it done. Now, Dern did come off a very good performance recently against Lupita Godinez. and that was a pretty good performance for her. But since then, another thing as well that I don't usually bring up too much, but I think it's worth noting, Dern, outside of the octagon, outside of the gym, has been like going through a lot at the moment, which would have disrupted her fight camp for this main event fight, because her ex-husband Antonio Tricoli allegedly was involved in something to do with her other ex-husband when he went to go and pick up her child from school, and it has resulted in Dern breaking up with Tricoli. So Dern's been going through like some personal family issues right now, which obviously is none of my business, but it is going to disrupt her training. Would have definitely been on her mind for at least like multiple weeks, you know. So I think that's something to talk about. Even though, as I said, it's none of my business, but it would have definitely disrupted the training that she was doing. So yeah, I think that Ribas just has the more well-rounded skill set. Ribas is also going to have Jacobe from We Want Picks sitting in the front row, screaming at her, which seems to be a pretty good advantage for fighters because he has been. Man, Jacobe at the Apex, I completely forgot about that. Man, it's going to be entertaining watching that vlog back. And if you actually watch the fight live, listen for a man in the front row screaming throughout the whole fight, man, because I think I'm looking forward to it. Shout out to Jacob. Yeah, that's definitely going to make the event a little bit more exciting. And with that being said, Jacob won't be live streaming this weekend, so maybe I will. Maybe I will. I'm not too sure if I will, because I think my flatmates might be coming home by then. But yeah, maybe I'll go live for this card. I'm actually looking forward to it. Unfortunately, one of the fights I was really looking forward to, Parsons versus Gustafsson, has been cancelled, but hopefully it results in a better matchup. Goff versus Gustafsson. If anyone from the matchmakers or anyone knows someone from the matchmakers, trust me, do it. Goff versus Gustafsson. It makes sense. It's the best fight that I think that you can actually make outside of like the top 30 of any division. Yeah, got very off topic, but you got the pick. Ribas by KO in this matchup. I think that she's going to win against Dern for the second time, and I think that this should be a pretty good card. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.